What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here to talk to you about Star Wars, the Prequel Trilogy, a graphic novel. This is by the same creative team that did the adaptation of the Star Wars original trilogy graphic novel that I talked about. And I checked out this book and the other book from the library. Checked them both out at the same time. Really wasn't sure what I was going to get into when I checked both of these out. Then I read through the original trilogy book first and had kind of some expectations going into this, but I was still a little optimistic because I am a much bigger fan of the original trilogy than I am the prequel trilogy. I understand that nowadays a lot of people have kind of grown fond of the prequel trilogy. I still don't think that those movies are very good. I am still disappointed in a lot of the narrative choices that the prequel movies made, and also a lot of the basic execution of the narrative choices I think were done pretty poorly. There's just a whole lot that I still to this day think wasn't done very well by the prequel movies. And so after I read the comic book adaptation of the original trilogy and I said to myself, what was the point of this book? I was still thinking, well, maybe the prequel trilogy comic book adaptation will be an improvement over the prequel movies, because one of the big problems I have with the prequel movies is that everyone sounds like an emotionless robot. They don't feel like human beings going on an adventure. That was something I really loved when you watch A New Hope and Luke and Han are screaming at each other, hey, we're going to have company. I've talked about this before. In the prequel trilogy, you don't get that. Everyone just feels very calm and zen, and that was a deliberate choice that I feel like was a huge misstep. I don't want to watch these emotionless robots going on an adventure. I want to see human beings who have thoughts and feelings and are able to express those thoughts and feelings. But then I thought, in a comic book, you're not going to have really weird line readings. You can read into it as much emotion as you want. So whenever Padme Amidala is saying, I will not condone an action that will lead to a course of war, you can read that as, I will not condone an action that will lead to a course of war. You know, you can read it differently in a comic book. You are in charge of the direction and the emotional beats of the story. Having said that, this still is basically a faithful adaptation of the prequel movies, so if there is a lot of really big stuff from the prequels that you don't like, this book is still pretty much doing all of that. It is still truncating the events of the movies, much like the comic book adaptation of the original trilogy did. So if you are a big fan of the prequels and you want to see every moment from the prequels recreated in this book, you are not going to get that. There is still conversation and quick little scenes that are not in this book. This is covering the highlights of the prequel movies. So if you're a fan of those movies and you wanted to see something like that recreated in this style in a comic book, you are possibly going to be disappointed. But getting back to what I was saying about dialogue reading, I feel like in some ways this is an improvement over the movies we got, because I can read conversations between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and I can say, hey, in my mind I'm imagining them acting like, oh wow, we're in a really dangerous situation. Maybe Obi-Wan screams, Master, look, droids, over there! You know, he's a little bit more cautious or a little bit more scared than he was in the movie. But then also, you get to scenes with Jar Jar Binks, who is a character that I don't especially like. I know a lot of people think that he's funny and cute, and what's the harm? I find the character to be really annoying, but when you are watching The Phantom Menace, Jar Jar might have a line that takes 3 seconds for him to deliver, and then it's done. And I can kind of force myself to go into a fugue state anytime he speaks, and then I can bring myself out whenever anyone else is speaking, and then I can just kind of try to ignore this really irritating character. But then in this book, his dialogue is nearly unreadable. I'm looking at some of his dialogue and I'm thinking, what is he trying to say? And I have that with the movie as well, but then the movie will move past it, and then Qui-Gon or Anakin's mom or Anakin or Padme will start speaking, and then I'm like, okay, time to focus on what they're saying. But with the book, I have stopped myself, and I'm just staring at a speech bubble with something that makes absolutely no sense to my human brain, and I'm like, this is weird. I don't understand. So in some ways, I do think this is an improvement, but then in other ways, I'm like, wow, this is actually worse. But overall, I don't have a whole lot to say about this that I didn't already say about the Star Wars original trilogy adaptation. Basically, if you wanted to see the story of Anakin Skywalker's rise and fall, I don't know why you would go to this book book if you are interested in the prequels and you wouldn't just go and watch the prequels. Now, some people might say, well, I really don't like the prequels, so I would rather see this book. And to that I would say, okay, but then this book is going to remind you of things you didn't like in the prequels. So you are still probably going to be disappointed and upset if you don't like the prequels and you read this book, because it's going to do a lot of the same things. It still has some of the bad dialogue. It might not be hindered by really forced or bad reading of that dialogue, but the dialogue itself in places is still really bad. So overall, I would say in places, I think this book is an improvement, but also in some places, I think it is actually a detriment to be reading this story as opposed to seeing it play out on screen. So those are my brief thoughts on the prequel adaptation by, I didn't even read who this was, but it's some of the same people who did the original trilogy. Alessandro Ferrari, Matteo Piana, Ingo Romling, Andrea Parisi, Andrea Greppi, Igor Camisio, Marco Dominici, and Monica Catalano. So a few other names in there, but those are the folks who brought you this adaptation of the Star Wars prequels. That's about all that I have to say about that book. I will see you guys in the future with some other videos. In the meantime, have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.